Malignant hyperthermia is a hypermetabolic reaction that occurs when susceptible individuals are exposed to volatile general anesthetics like isoflurane, succinylcholine, or halothane. Some early signs of a malignant hyperthermia reaction are hypercarbia, sinus tachycardia, masseter muscle rigidity, and generalized muscle rigidity. Some of the later signs of a reaction include ECG changes that are usually related to hyperkalemia, ventricular ectopy or bigeminy, ventricular tachycardia or fibrillation, hyperthermia, myoglobinuria as related to rhabdomyolysis, and excessive bleeding. Individuals who are susceptible to malignant hyperthermia have a genetic abnormality in their skeletal muscles that allows large amounts of calcium to accumulate in the presence of certain anesthetics. This causes an increase in aerobic metabolism, which also causes an excess production of carbon dioxide and lactic acid. An increase in sustained muscle contraction generates a large amount of body heat, and the body is not effectively able to reduce the body temperature. This leads to an increased oxygen use and organ dysfunction. An increased metabolic rate also leads to rapid consumption of energy stores, which force the body into rhabdomyolysis, which causes the myoglobinuria and even more concerning hyperkalemia. The mechanism by which volatile anesthetics cause this reaction isn't known, but susceptible individuals can also be triggered by heat and intense exercise. Children and Caucasians of North European descent are most likely to be affected by malignant hyperthermia, and the incidence of acute malignant hyperthermic reactions are somewhere between 1 in 200 and 1 in 250,000. Even though malignant hyperthermia is a genetic condition, there's no practical screening test that we can use to predict whether someone will have a hyperthermic event. In order to predict someone's likelihood, the best thing that we can do is to ask that person whether they have a personal or family history of adverse reactions to anesthetics. If a person has an adverse reaction or a family history of adverse reactions that seem to be linked to malignant hyperthermia, that person is to be considered at risk, and alternative methods of anesthetics should be used. There's a malignant hyperthermia grading scale that can be used to determine whether a previous adverse reaction was linked to a malignant hyperthermia event. Certain criteria are analyzed, and each positive criteria is given a score of 10 points, and any patient with a score of over 20 points is considered at risk, and non-volatile anesthetics should be used. So these criteria include a previous reaction with the criteria of respiratory acidosis, metabolic acidosis, muscle rigidity, muscle breakdown, increased temperature, elevated baseline creatinine kinase levels, and a family history. And like I said, anybody with a score of 20 or higher should be given a non-volatile anesthetic for their surgery. As you can probably tell, a detailed physical exam and patient history is a very important part of the preoperative process and is a very important component in avoiding someone having a malignant hyperthermia reaction. If a patient is suspected of having a malignant hyperthermic reaction within surgery, certain basic steps should be followed to avoid further damage. Firstly, the patient's oxygen should be at 100%, so they should be bumped up to 100% oxygen and intubated if they're not already intubated. Any volatile anesthetics should be terminated and discontinued and replaced with an alternative. The surgery should be terminated at the safest point as soon as possible. And dantrolene should be administered also as soon as possible. Dantrolene is the only known antidote for volatile anesthetics and is the only known stop for a malignant hyperthermic reaction. We should be monitoring the patient for any signs of hyperkalemia and treating them as necessary. And we should also be initiating any supportive care for any symptoms of a malignant hyperthermia reaction as they arise. Following an episode of malignant hyperthermia, patients should be counseled to avoid triggers in the future. They should be avoiding volatile anesthetics in any future surgeries, and they should be avoiding any kind of exercise if the temperature is elevated. They should also be informing family members that they've had a reaction. Because this is a genetic condition, family members can be at risk as well. Hopefully this video was helpful for you, and if you need any further information, the Malignant Hyperthermia Association of the United States is a fantastic resource for all kinds of information on malignant hyperthermia, and I'll leave the link down below so you can check it out.